All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 p.m. sharp on Tuesday, February the 17th. We're going to call this Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order. Thanks to Ms. Edmonds, I'm borrowing her laptop while I run my third install update going on mine, so if you see some switching up here, please don't be distracted. We have a few things to talk about today. The first, though, before we get too far in anything, is we have consideration of our January 20th, 2026 meeting minutes. If committee members have had an opportunity to review those minutes, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion. Excuse me. We have a motion for approval of the minutes with a second. All in favor, that's from Ms. Gordon and seconded by Dr. Ing. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the January 20th meeting minutes have been adopted. So today, our discussion is going to revolve around our 2025 finances, our financial report, and our financial statements. Before we get started, though, I wanted to share a few things with you as committee members as we start this budget season. And this will only take a minute, but I wanted to give you some context. One of the things that we will be struggling with as a board and with this committee is how can we possibly, with all of the funding we receive, not have sufficient funding to provide all of the services that we're required to provide. And I found this, it's not necessarily scientific, but it's a good narrative that I wanted to share with you. Basically, every year since the last 100 years, new requirements are placed on public schools beyond just providing those basic educational services. We receive this from the federal government, we receive these from the state government, and most often, it's all too common a situation, these requirements do not come with funding or do not come with adequate funding. So without adding more dollars, without adding any more hours to the school day, and by restricting the number of days in our school year, we're asked to do more and more each year without sufficient resources to do that. And so I have here a timeline I'm going to share with you all, going decade by decade, of all of the different, some of you may have seen this before, but of all of the different areas of instruction that we've been required to add without additional time during the day, and often without additional dollars. So that as we look at our budget and how we're going to fund essential educational services with insufficient available dollars, hopefully we can look at this and help put this in the context of the long list of unfunded mandates that are put on us as we chart a case forward. So I'll pass two this way. I'll pass two this way. I'll hold some for the other board members, and then Dr. Taylor, I have some for you and your staff as well.
Can we get this loaded into Assembly at some point?
Yes, I have it. I can put it up as a Google Doc, and so we can convert it over there as well. And I'll have a copy available for the minutes, okay? All right. So after that prologue, we'll go into the first official item of business, which is the presentation on our 2025 fiscal year annual comprehensive financial report, what we refer to as the ACFR. All right. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Ms. Posey, Mr. Nieder, and their team. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Haggerty, members of the board, and Superintendent Taylor. You've already introduced our item. The ACFR is our annual comprehensive financial report. This is for the fiscal year ended June 30th of 2025. The annual report provides detailed independent audit, overview of our district's financial position, and operating results for the fiscal year June 30th, 2025. It reflects our commitment to transparency, fiscal accountability, and sound stewardship of public resources. Today, we have with us the board's audit committee, Chair Charles Coble and Vice Chair Faith Bynum. Charles is our attorney with Pierce, and Faith has a CPA, MBA, and is also a business owner. They'll be presenting their independent report to the board. And then following their report, we'll hear from Tyler. Tyler Beatty is a partner with Forbes Mazars, and he'll provide his summary of the audit from the perspective of the external auditors. Following their presentations, you will hear from Ms. Latrice Varner. She's our Assistant Finance Officer who oversees our accounting department. She'll provide an overview of the audit timeline and the ACFR recognitions for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. Ms. Varner has served in her role for the past year, and as the head of accounting, leads all external audit coordination efforts. She and her team are responsible for ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the district's financial transactions and reporting. Prior to joining WCPSS, she held key financial leadership roles within government organizations where she effectively managed public resources and supported operational and financial goals. Following her remarks, I will conclude the presentation by highlighting key components of the financial and statistical sections of the ACFR. Mr. David Nieder will now share a couple of remarks before we begin our presentation.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Just a few comments before we get into the formal presentation. One being, we normally would bring the financial reports for the year ending June 30, in this case June 30, 2025 to you, normally in a November or December timeframe. That's when the audit's complete, wrap-up work is done, the LGC has had a chance to look at it. This year we have the unique opportunity of a federal government shutdown, and I won't get into the details, but that prevented the government from developing some pronouncements and protocols about changes that have been made. And so that is the reason we're bringing this now to you in February. Don't anticipate that happening again, but you don't know. And then, fingers crossed, yes. Couple other comments. One being, there are a lot of different types of audits that take place in our world. And I want to be clear about what this audit was. This is an audit of our financial statements and our financial records. And Tyler's probably going to maybe get into a little more detail. I'm being very simplistic. But one of the primary purposes of the audit is to ensure that our financial reporting matches our true financial condition underneath it. They do a lot of other things too, but it's to make sure that these are accurate and reliable within reason financial statements representing the Board of Education. And then finally, the last thing I'd like to say is the audit committee, which we've got the chair and the vice chair, is unique. And to my knowledge, I'm not aware of another Board of Education in the state that has an audit committee. And it was put into place, I think it was in 2005, 2006. And there are two primary charges for this committee, and it's made up of independent members. There are a couple staff members, but everybody else is outside and nominated by the board. And there's a policy that speaks to it, and the policy directs the board to look for financial professionals, legal professionals, and there are two primary charges for this independent audit committee. One is to assist the board in the selection of the external financial auditor. And Wake County Schools and every other district in the state is statutorily required to have an annual independent financial audit. That's a good thing. The audit committee, though, made up of these independent members that are not staff, and the only staff members that are on the committee are non-voting members, is to, again, advise the board on the selection of audit firm, but then also look at the results of the audit and the ACFR and be an independent party from staff to present the findings to the board. So it's not a bit of the fox guarding the hen house, if you will. It's a check and a balance, if you will. So just wanted to clarify that for everyone. And Trish, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you. So we do have state law which requires LEAs, local school administrations, to have an annual audit of your financial statements. And so that is in your General Statute 115C-447, and you have Board Policy 8221, that's adopted policy around the annual independent audit. In addition to fiscal transparency, all of the reports are published. These are available on our intranet website. You have hot links in the presentation for 17 years of financial reports. And we will post the 2025 report after this presentation to the board today. You heard from Mr. Nieder. He shared a bit about the Independent Audit Committee that is adopted in Board Policy 8810. And so as he shared, they are independent of the external auditor. They are independent of staff from a voting member perspective. And you have 2 non-voting members on this committee. Here are the listed voting members. There are 6 currently serving. 1 vacancy, and there are 2 non-voting members. And now I am going to turn it over to the Independent Audit Committee, Chair and Vice Chair, to provide their report to the board.
Thank you, Ms. Posey. Again, I'm Charles Coble, and the Chair of the Audit Committee, and with me here is Faith Bynum, the Vice Chair. I'll start with a thank you. I myself grew up here in Raleigh and went through Wake County Public Schools. My wife went through all the way through in Wake County Public Schools, as did both of our daughters. So we've really benefited our family greatly from Wake County Schools, and appreciate very much the time and the effort and what thought that you all put into the system and into making it the best that it can be. Certainly to Dr. Taylor and the staff as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to have a small role in this myself. I've been on the audit committee for more than 10 years. I've been the chair for the last couple of years, and have enjoyed that opportunity. So I'll be pretty brief substantively here. As Mr. Nieder explained, our functions are to recommend to the board who the outside auditing firm will be. That's Mr. Beatty's firm. And they've been in that cycle now for a couple of years. We usually every 3 years or so revisit that. In a year that we didn't have that on our plate as this year, our typical schedule is to hear from Mr. Beatty and his team at the outset about the scope of the audit and any particular things that may be different or of note as they set the planning out the audit for the given year. And then we receive the report at the end of the process. We've got a good group here that have either legal background or an accounting background or financial advisory background, and so we've had good, robust discussions after hearing from Mr. Beatty or his team about what they learned and what they found in the course of the audit each year, and we go through the sort of the critical elements of it. We don't really have a decision-making role there. It's more just to receive, review, discuss, and if there were things that we wanted to bring to the board's attention, then now would be our time to do that. The good news is, as you'll hear from him, there were no corrective actions that they identified that were required. So I think from our standpoint, the time is just to turn it over to Mr. Beatty and Ms. Posey to walk through, but the good news is that there's no bad news to report.
And I'll just chime in. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Faith Bynum Patterson, principal of Faith Bynum CPA/PC. I have been serving on the audit committee, I want to say maybe around 7 years now, and it has been just an immense pleasure to serve. I cannot just the joy it is to be able to come together with, as an independent party, and to really go through, and again, an ACFR is not simple. It's not easy, as you can see. However, we're coming from different vantage points, and so, as Chair Charles Coble has stated, we really bring in-depth questions, because we can't know every single detail about the audit. However, we do trust in just the experience that we are bringing to the table. And Forvis and Tyler, led with him and his team, has been amazing with walking us through the audit. And then, as Chair Coble aforementioned, that last year we started a meeting over the summertime to really talk about the planning, right? Because it's not just about the audit. You don't want just one meeting. You want to understand what's coming down the pipeline, and giving us different pronouncements that may be coming that are new, that we may need more interpretation of. And so it's been a pleasure to be serving. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and it is just my honor to be here.
Are there any questions from the board?
Any questions? All right, please proceed.
All right.
Perfect.
I will turn it over
Thank
to
you.
Mr. Beatty.
Yeah, well, I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. As Tricia mentioned, my name's Tyler Beatty. I'm a assurance partner at Forvis Mazars. I actually sit in our Greensboro, North Carolina offices, but I help lead the North Carolina School District practice for the firm. So we have auditors in Raleigh, North Carolina, my office in Greensboro and Charlotte that perform audits for school districts in North Carolina. Chris, I should have printed out all the GASB pronouncements that have happened in the decades, because I think the big one was GASB 34, and we're up to GASB 101. So significant number of changes, and there was a new one this year that the board had to adopt and comply with. So. Alrighty, I'll go through a quick agenda, and then we'll get right into it. First, I wanted to talk about the audit results, which is included in our audit opinion, which I believe is on page 1 of the AGFR. Also included in that opinion is the auditor responsibilities that David touched on a little bit, but it really outlines our roles and responsibilities as the auditor of the financial statements. There's a communication report that's issued in addition to the AGFR that includes all required communications. We'll go through those. We'll do a quick view of the financial highlights. We did trim this down a little bit as to not step on Tricia's toes with her analysis of the financials. And I think really, as you'll see us speak, our role as auditors is to present accurate information. And then it's really the responsibility and the role of management and the board to analyze that information to make management decisions. And then lastly, we'll take a review of the compliance audit.
So as you get started, one of the things that I've really come to appreciate about Forvis is that you can take the language of accounting and translate it to English. So as you get started, I just wanted to level set for everyone. The board members should be pretty good about this, but for anybody that might be watching at home or joining us in the audience, we use the term audit a lot, okay? We've got our internal audit. You're going to hear about the compliance audit. You're going to hear about the ACFR. Quickly, could you just spell out what the difference between those three things are?
Yeah, great question. So the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, is the financial information. It includes the basic financial statements. But in addition to the financial statements, it includes an introductory section and a statistical section that's additional information that's added to the ACFR. So our role as a financial statement auditor is what it sounds like, to audit the financial statements and the notes to the financial statements. So this information is prepared by management of the board, and we perform procedures to ensure that the amounts that are included in the financial statements are materially accurate. We're not saying they're good numbers. We're not saying they're bad numbers. That's up for management to analyze. What we're saying is that the numbers in there are accurate. So that's the financial statement audit, which includes one opinion. Because the board also receives federal funding in excess of $750,000, there's an additional audit related to that federal funding. It's called, typically we would call it a compliance audit. It's subject to government auditing standards as well as the uniform guidance. The uniform guidance is issued by the OMB, or the Office Management and Budget. In layman's term, there's a risk-based approach that we take to the federal awards. We go through a selection process, and based on that selection process, we have to select a certain number of federal funds that are received that then we perform compliance procedures on. So that's separate than the financial statement audit, and it's because the board received federal awards. Same exercise with state awards. So because the board receives state awards, there's a State Audit Implementation Act. It generally follows the uniform guidance, which is provided by the feds, but there's a North Carolina State Audit Single Audit Implementation Act. So then there you'll see a state audit report and the compliance procedures that are performed around the state awards. And then lastly, the last report is typically called a yellow book report. Because you're a government audit entity, there's actually an audit manual that used to be yellow before everything was online, which is why they call it the yellow book. But it's specific to things, compliance with contractual agreements, grants, and other additional procedures that a governmental accounting auditor would perform in addition to the financial statement audit. So that report is included in the ACFR as well. So, and Chris, I know the reports are long, but in each of our opinions, it explicitly describes what our roles and responsibilities are related to each aspect of the ACFR.
All right, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just wanted to set some context for you.
Yeah, of course, no, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And maybe real quick, so to the federal audit, the compliance audit, to David's point, so in layman's terms, because we're auditing federal awards, there's basically an audit manual that the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, provides auditors that basically tells you the steps to follow or steps to consider if you're auditing a federal award. This year, because of the government shutdown and other things, the federal government, the OMB, didn't release, it's called a compliance supplement, until November of 2025. So for us as auditors, we're basically working on last year's compliance supplement, but we were precluded, like every other accounting firm, from releasing the current year financial statements until we had the updated audit manual, until we were able to analyze the manual and ensure there was nothing new or different procedures that we needed to perform. So the LGC actually extended the audit deadline for all school districts to February 12th, 2026. I believe we released in mid-December, so still a number of months ahead other school districts. So, and having said that, it has been, the audit, it's been approved by the LGC, it's been presented to the audit committee, it's been submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, so all steps have been checked. And that probably happened, the last step was to submit to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, and that happened in the middle of January.
Perfect. All right,
Alrighty.
thank you.
And I'm happy to keep this presentation fluid, so don't hold your questions until the end. So, as we mentioned, in page 1, our audit opinion, our independent auditor's report on the financial statement, we're engaged effectively to provide an opinion. So this SNP has an opinion for us, and it's called an unmodified opinion. And so what an unmodified opinion is, it basically says all the information related to the financial statements and the notes to the financial statements included in this report. We didn't have anything that came to our attention where we would need to modify the opinion or call out something that we felt was inappropriate. It didn't align with accounting principles that are generally accepted, which is why you have an unmodified report. Again, to reiterate, as auditors, we're basically, what we're doing is trying to make sure and testing procedures, performing procedures to ensure that the information is accurate. You'll see all the time we have to be independent of the board, we have to be independent of board management. We literally can't make decisions for management. So again, to reiterate, our purpose is to ensure the information in the notes of the financials and the financials are accurate. We're not analyzing to say you spent too much money, you didn't spend enough money. We're just saying this is what you did. And I think that's important to keep in mind what our roles and responsibility as a financial statement auditor is. So then into that, which is I think a new SNP that we've shared. That's again, this is included in our audit opinion. it's been there every year, but I felt it warranted to point it out this year. But it's effectively, again, our explicit responsibilities as auditors of the audit of the financial statements. So the first paragraph talks about what reasonable assurance, again, we plan and perform our procedures to gain reasonable assurance. Reasonable assurance is a high-level assurance. It's not absolute assurance, and effectively what that means is that we can do everything that we're required to do in accordance with our professional standards, but there could still be material misstatements that exist that weren't detected as a part of audit procedures. It does talk about fraud, so obviously if there was fraud that was occurring at a board, that's harder to detect a material misstatement as auditors because it could involve intentional omissions, forgery, collusion, and override of internal control that would not be identified by an auditor performing audit procedures in accordance with our professional standards. So again, reasonable assurance, pretty high level, but it's not absolute assurance. And then the bullet points really talk about what our procedures are in accordance with GAS and government auditing standards. So exercising professional judgment, again, remaining independent, having professional skepticism as we're performing audit procedures. We take a risk-based approach to the audit, which means we identify and assess the risk of material misstatement for the financial statements, and then we perform tests on a test basis and design procedures to address the risk of material misstatement that we identify. We do obtain an understanding internal control, but it's relevant to the audit, and it's really relevant to designing procedures that are appropriate for us to perform procedures on the financial statement amounts. We don't express an opinion on internal controls. We're not looking at every single internal control that might be implemented or not implemented by the board. And again, we do not provide an opinion on internal control. So this is an audit specific to the financial statements. It's not an audit designed to test the operating effectiveness of internal controls. Last two bullets, we do look at the appropriateness of accounting policies. If there's significant accounting estimates, we look at those, and as well as we evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements. And then lastly, if there were events that raised substantial doubt about the board's ability to continue as a going concern, that would be addressed in our audit as well. So that was a lot. It's in our opinion, and it'll continue to be there. Alrighty. Again, aside from the ACFR, we do issue a required communication report. This is effectively a side letter that includes required communications from us as auditors to the Board of Education. So in that letter, as we've discussed previously, there are significant estimates and sensitive disclosures that, again, goes back to the sensitive estimates that we identified and performed procedures around, similar year over year. So useful lives of depreciable assets, and then the others related to your net pension and net OPEB liabilities. And then there are certain estimates and inputs in for your lease liabilities and subscription liabilities, which we test and consider. Maybe more importantly, if there were difficulties or disagreements that was identified through the audit process with management, if there were uncorrected misstatements or other significant items that should be communicated, they would be in this report. We didn't have any difficulties or disagreements. We didn't have any uncorrected misstatements to communicate in this other report. And then lastly, there is a management representation letter that's signed by management at the conclusion of the audit that just reiterates the representations that were given to us through the audit, and that's included as an attachment in this report. All right, we will go through some quick financial statement highlights again, because I know Tricia will go through this in a lot more detail. So this slide presents your revenues. So your revenues year over year, with the very left being your state revenues, the middle being your county and other local, and then the very right being your federal funding. So probably as all you're aware, state funding, county funding was relatively consistent year over year, maybe up a few basis points compared to the prior year. As would be expected with the expiration of COVID dollars, that federal funding is continuing to decrease. So it decreased right around $55 million this year with the expiration of the Education Stabilization Fund, and that expired in September of 2024. So what little bit of money was received in fiscal year '25 would continue, is going to expire and will no longer be there in fiscal year 2026. So we've discussed this ad nauseum year over year, but we would expect the federal funding is going to decrease. It's going to stabilize. So as shown on the next slide, there's a continued emphasis and effort to protect fund balance. As you can see on this slide, so this is your general fund balance year over year over year. As shown on Exhibit 4 of the financial statements, the board budgeted to utilize fund balance this year. The board did spend fund balance in the current year when compared to the prior year in their general fund. Total fund balance is down right around $23-ish million. That available for appropriations down similar amounts. Your unassigned fund balance stayed consistent because you appropriated less fund balance in the current year than you did in the prior year for subsequent years' expenditures. But probably the big takeaway again is you utilize fund balance in fiscal year '25. You plan to utilize fund balance in fiscal year '25. But at some point there's got to be a stabilization of fund balance, because if it's continued to be used without replenished, you're going to run out. And I'm sure that David and Tricia can speak to that. But I think what I would say to that point is I think it feels that from our perspective, the board's been strategic and budgeted to use fund balance and use fund balance. Obviously, with the news and other things, other districts haven't been as strategic. And I'd say this is another kind of kudos to the audit committee of having these constant communications. I mean, I've been in boardrooms before we're presenting audit information where we literally got management's financial statements. We test the financial statements, and then we're doing the presentation 6 months later, and the board's surprised that they spent fund balance. And it's like, we got the same information that your team gave us. Anyways, my point is ensure there's continued strategy there, and just ensure there's a point to balance the budget or understand what you're using or appropriating fund balance for. And the other big thing that we say is, particularly with fund balance, as much as possible, try to utilize fund balance for one-time expenditures, because if you're using fund balance for a recurring expenditure, it's like paying the mortgage with a savings account, right? If the mortgage is a recurring expense, the savings account's going to dry up. So, and again, I'm sure Tricia and David can speak more to that. I will move on to the compliance audit. So as we spoke about before, we do, in addition to the audit of the financial statements, we do compliance audits in accordance with the uniform guidance for federal awards. We don't look at every single federal program. It's a risk-based approach to select certain programs that are identified as major or as high risk. And then there are other procedures to do where we may have to look at some low-risk programs as well. So through that analysis, in the current year, we did identify 4 major programs. It was a special education cluster, the magnet school assistance cluster, project leaders in support of effective instruction. So as we talked about earlier, in this instance, we would use a combination of our professional expertise along with the audit manual from the uniform guidance, the office manager, and the budget. And the state puts out compliance supplements as well. So we use all of those manuals to perform and test procedures related to these programs. As mentioned already, we didn't have any findings related to these programs to report. Then next was the state major program. So similar exercise. The board receives state funding year over year. We go through a risk-based approach to select programs that are subject to testing in accordance with the uniform guidance in the State Single Audit Implementation Act. This year we did have 4 programs: the State Public School Fund, which is tested annually, the CTE, State Months of Employment, CTE Program Support Funds, and then the school bus appropriation. Again, audit manuals are provided from the state of North Carolina. We use our own internal firm policies to design and test and perform procedures related to these programs, which we did and accomplished, and we didn't have any findings to report related to our state single audit. So that wraps up my presentation. I can pass it to Tricia for her detailed financial review, but happy to answer any questions.
All right. Board members, you've heard the presentation. I know you've had a chance to review it. Do you have any questions about anything that's been presented so far? All right, great
All right.
job.
Thank you.
Pass it
I
on.
will turn it over to Tricia.
Well, I'm going to let Ms. Varner share with you sort of our annual comprehensive financial report timeline, as her team leads a lot of the financial balancing, and she coordinates with our external auditor on all of the documentation, financial statements, and any other information they request.
Good afternoon. My name is Latrice Barr, as Ms. Posey just stated, and I oversee the accounting department. With that being said, as of last week, I had my one-year anniversary with Wake County, so I've had the privilege to work with the external auditors with the audit, as well as with our ACFR for fiscal year ending June 30, 2025. I'm going to go over these slides as it pertains to our annual financial report as far as the timeline. With the external audit for Wake County Public School System, our financial transactions occur May through October 2025. With that being said, I would like to go over what that timeline consists of. The audit process is structured and spans months, beginning with pre-audit preparation in May and concluding with the issuance of the final audit report in October. From May through June, I, as well as my staff, we focus on pre-audit activities, including closing the fiscal year, reconciling accounts, preparing required schedules, and supporting documentation. The preparation phase is critical to ensuring accuracy, completeness, and readiness for external review. I conduct a kickoff meeting with our departments, and that meeting basically sets expectations for the audit, such as timely submissions, as well as having a centralized location to put those documents in. Field work typically begins in late summer when independent auditors conduct detailed testing of transactions, as well as internal controls, compliance requirements, and financial reporting. During this time, our auditors review major funds, as previously stated, federal programs, capital assets, payroll, and other key financial activities. As field work is in process, we're working on reconciling our general ledger, as well as preparing our financial statements with the assistance of our contractor, who's a certified public accountant. By early fall, our audit field work concludes. Our draft financial statements are reviewed, and any audit adjustments are finalized. This process culminates in October with the presentation of the annual comprehensive financial report and the auditor's opinion to the Board of Education. This May through October timeline reflects a coordinated effort between working with our departments and external auditors to maintain transparency, accountability, and strong financial stewardship in support of our schools and community. The audit of the financial statements ended in October, but as also previously stated, due to the federal shutdown, the single audit did not conclude until December. And that gives more context for the financial transactions that takes place in May through October 2025 through, May through October 2025, excuse me. And as on the next bullet point, the federal shutdown, as we stated, was delayed due to no fault of our own, but it was delayed. And that was November through December 2025, and we submitted to the Local Government Commission December 20, 2025. We reviewed and accepted, it was reviewed and accepted by the LGC in January 8, 2026, and reviewed by the Board of Education Audit Committee January 28, 2026. And then it was submitted to the Federal Clearinghouse January 28, 2026. This next slide details our certificates of achievement. We basically have a letters transmittal. That letter is a cover document along with our application, as well as required submissions of our ACFR, and any auditor comments need to be submitted to these two organizations, the Association of School Business Officials International, as well as the Government Finance Officers Association. To give you more context with those two organizations, the Association of School Business Officials, International Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting for its annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. This marks our 36th consecutive year that the board has received this award, reflecting its commitment to transparency and high standards in financial reporting. The Certificate of Excellence is awarded to school districts that publish an easily readable and efficiently organized ACFR, satisfying both generally accepted accounting principles and applicable legal requirements. Wake County's consistent recognition underscores its dedication to sound financial management practices. With the Certificate of Excellence received from the Government Finance Officers Association for our annual comprehensive financial report for also fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. This award, which Wake County's Board of Education has now earned for 36 consecutive years, recognizes our commitment to transparency, full disclosure, and the highest standards in public financial reporting. It honors governments that exemplify accountability and openness in their financial practices. Again, these two associations have given Wake County certificates of achievement for excellence in financial reporting, and that was as of June 30th, 2024. We have now submitted our June 30th, 2025 fiscal year end ACFR, so we hopefully look for those same results for this year.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. All right, we are now going to turn to our financial and statistical review. And so I've got page numbers listed when I reference some of the financial statements, but I will also have snippets of those schedules in your presentation as well. So the overall financial position of the school system remains strong and stable. Our total assets and deferred outflows exceeded our total liabilities and deferred inflows by approximately $2.6 billion. This reflects continued investment in school facilities and long-term infrastructure. The total net position increased by $258.4 million over the prior year, driven once again by the capital construction activity that exceeded annual depreciation. And so this can be seen here in the schedule. You'll see the year over year on our total primary government section, those last two columns. You've got your 2024 stated and then your 2025 stated. All right. Our fund balance, you heard a little bit from Mr. Beatty. He talked about our governmental fund balance and how it's decreased from the prior year. We shared a little bit in the board retreat about our fund balance, and it's slowly and steadily decreasing. It had been built up during the COVID period. So you'll see, once again, the general fund is $95.2 million. The combined governmental fund balance is $113 million. Our unassigned fund balance is $37 million, which is a slight decrease from the 2024 fund balance, roughly about $39 million. So the unassigned fund balance, it can be used to balance the future year budget, but as Mr. Beatty shared, it's often recommended it's used for one-time expenditures and not recurring expenditures. Your next slide shows where fund balance has been reserved for this year. So the $95.2 million is reserved in statutorily required state statute, your inventories, and then we have our special projects. So targeted enrollment, we had allocated $2 million. We had the Juul settlement reserve, $2.7 million. There's other special projects of $1.5 million. Our insurance, where we have required reserves there of $15.2 million. The flexible benefit plan, as well as the potential unfunded pension liability, which must be restricted, 2.7-ish. And then the appropriated fund balance in the subsequent year was 21.4. So our remaining fund balance is $37 million. All right. You saw a draft of this where it was before we had the audited financials. And so you'll see here that we did have the decrease, as Mr. Beatty stated, of $23.8 million in the general fund balance. The unassigned balance is $37 million, which is approximately 5% of the subsequent year's county appropriation budget. In the board's policy for unassigned operating fund balance, policy 8101, the board aims to target 6% of the subsequent year's county appropriation. That would be roughly about $44 million, just to give you some context on that 6%. In addition, the board also tries not to appropriate more than 50%. That's in your board's budget, the board's policy, 8101, to not appropriate more than 50% of the unassigned towards the subsequent year's budget. And so in past years, I believe we've had to waive that policy to appropriate more than the 50%, but those are items that are in the board's policy. So you'll see that with the trend, we had the spike in the unassigned and the general fund balance during the COVID years, which staff had shared with the board that we anticipated seeing that climb, and then we see the decline as we've completely come off of our federal funds during that ESSER time period. All right, our capital assets. This is where we're increasing in our investment in capital assets, primarily because of the building program. So it is $4.9 billion in our capital assets. So the board recognizes the asset, but the county holds the debt. And so that is why we show a more positive, favorable financial position. And you'll see on the next slide, we have the schedule here where you can see the board's buildings, 2024 3.2, and then 3.6, and that is billion. 3.2 billion, 3.6 billion. So now I want to look a little bit at our revenues. These are actual revenues, and this is comprehensive. So this includes your operating and your capital. So this is not just a look at your operating budget, this is operating and capital. So you'll see the actual revenues came in at $2.4 billion. We have primarily supported by our state appropriations at 49%. Your local county is 28%. The county capital is 17%. Your federal funds are 4%. And then you have other category at 2%. The other is really your fines and forfeitures and interest earned. Any questions on that slide? And just to give you general context, while you're looking at the comprehensive financial report, when we talk about operating, your percentages shift where your state is 59% of operating, your county is 34% of operating, and your federal is 2% of operating, where interest and fines and forfeitures fall to 1%. So looking at a 10-year trend, I wanted to show this from the perspective of all revenues for the district. And so you'll see these are actual revenues and sources, and you'll see the decline where we go from 52% down to 49% on the state. We have a slight increase with our county from 24% to 28%. Your county capital, you see the dip during the COVID years, so it's 17% in 2016, and we're still at 17% from the county with the capital, but we have the slight dip during the COVID years. You also note that the federal funds spiked during that COVID period from the pandemic relief funds, and then our other funding sources like fines, forfeitures, and interest remain pretty consistent at that 2% level. When considering a 3% decline with the state revenue over the 10-year period, the practical effect is greater than 3% when you think about the required salary increases as well as the employer contributions to the benefits. And so while those things increase, the state level has decreased, we still have those fixed costs that we have to maintain for those salaries and related employer benefits. So just wanted to share that as you look at the funding levels from each of the revenue sources. Any questions on this slide? All right. So as we look at enrollment and cost pressures, so the enrollment increased for the 2025 fiscal year by 1,125 students. The growth adds pressure to the day-to-day operations as well as our long-term financial planning. So on this particular slide, I wanted to capture, if you look in your book on pages 105 and 106, it breaks everything down, but you also are able to see your total operating cost, where it excludes capital. So these are our total operations of $13,032 per pupil. Your total operating cost excluding capital and charters is $12,552. Our charter funds flow through the school district, but they count in our expenditures on your financial statements. And then total operating and capital combined, you have $15,628 per pupil cost. So it just gives a different picture of the finances as you look at the per pupil cost and what truly goes towards the operating cost for students. That number is $12,552 per student.
Excuse me, Ms. Posey, paying like an average per pupil cost. And I'm just curious, when you put that number together, is that a per pupil operating cost for operating expenses, or does that also include capital?
I will have to defer to Mr. Mead. I'm not sure we have that information available right now.
Just both numbers with capital and strictly operating fall short of those other comparable districts. But in trying to accurately look at how far they fall short,
Yeah.
I'm just curious what those numbers are based
Information that
on.
we have provided historically in the budget process, in the budget document, is operating, does not include capital.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Posey, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no worries. Any other questions? Okay. So here we take a comprehensive look at the expenditures. So we looked at revenues and now we're looking at the expenditure side. So the expenditures remain aligned with instructional and student support priorities at 65%. Your capital outlay and construction at 17%. Your system-wide and operational supports at 14%, and charter school charges at 3%, along with debt services at 1%. If we were to remove the capital outlay, instructional and student support increases to 78% when we look at just the operating budget. So out of the $2.1 billion in operating costs, $1.6 billion supported our instructional and student priorities. On this next slide, you see the 10-year expenditure trend. You'll see during the COVID year, during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, we're decreasing in expenditure cost. But then as we look at the recovery, we're increasing in our expenditures because of the influx of the federal funds. And now you'll see that we're leveling out on the linear trend. So this is an annual comprehensive financial report. We want to once again highlight the unmodified or clean audit opinion, which confirms that our financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the district. Additionally, no material weaknesses were identified. This outcome reflects the strength of our internal controls, reinforces our continued commitment to sound financial management, transparency, and accountability to the board and the community we serve. So thank you for your time today. Are there any questions from the board?
Any questions? It's a lot to read, and of course you have your homework up there. I hope you've had a chance to at least dust off the cover and start poking through the material to review. All right. Yes, Chair Swanson.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you all for the work that goes on to ensuring that, number one, we're being fiscally responsible, number two, we're being transparent with the public dollars, and number three, the hard work that you all do to ensure that the checks and balances is taking place. I don't think there is another district that is as transparent as we are with our dollars, and so that's something that, I hope the public understands. And, we often hear that we have a large, $2 billion operating budget, and there's no checks and balances. Well, we've just proven that there is, I'm being mindful of my words, but there are, checks and balances here, and the audit shows for the past 30-some years that Wake County has been good stewards, and we will continue to be good stewards with the public's dollars. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you all for the work that you all do for that.
Thank you, Chair Swanson. Any other questions or comments about the presentation? Dr. Joe.
I just am trying to understand, on page 98, there's a significant jump in governmental activities for instructional programs between 2023 and 2024. Is that just population growth, or is there something else that I'm not thinking of?
What page were you?
98. At the very top line, the very top two lines, there's a significant percentage growth between 2023 and 24.
We can take a look at that.
Okay.
Just looking at a number isn't going to give you.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was,
answer.
if something came to mind right off the bat, but I'm just asking to think about if there's anything we can address that might cut back costs for 2025. Because I guess my second question is, and this you might not be able to answer either right now off the top of your head, but if we just stayed exactly the same, but considering rising costs, what percentage increase would it be for this year? Or what percentage increase have we been seeing so far this year from last year?
So it's an interesting question. We don't receive increases based on inflation.
Right.
So we have to absorb inflation within the existing budget. So we lose our buying power,
Right.
in a sense, by inflation. And I think we can look at these numbers here, but I do recall in instructional programs, those are all direct services that happen in our schools. These are all of our teacher and direct service provided positions based upon that description. We had a raise from the state. They provided raises in that year. And we also still had COVID funding, where 20% was required to go towards learning loss. So those are all things that would have been captured in those out years and expenditure costs. Because this doesn't break down by what funding source. This is all funding sources included in the expenditure line.
Yeah, I would add, it's likely, but I would want to confirm this, that as Ms. Posey said, the year-over-year increases are largely driven by salaries. About 80% of the budget goes towards salary and benefits. So not just salary increases that have been provided by the state, not so much this year, but historically in recent years, and also through increases the county, through the county appropriation, have provided, where the Board of Education has requested additional funding from the county to provide staff, including instructional staff on this line, increases above and beyond what the state is legislating.
Right.
So I'm guessing that's a large driver, but we'll look at it.
Yeah. I guess the number I'm trying to wrap my head around is if we didn't approve anything new, if we didn't, I still think that the cost would be more than inflation, or at least more than what the state is saying inflation is, or the government is saying inflation is.
So, Dr. Jove, I appreciate the question, and I know what you're hitting at, and you're spot on point in my opinion. And while the audit just reflects what our numbers are, and we use it the way you said, what's key about that is that if we continue to do the work this year, next year, there's going to be an inflation cost, if you will. There's going to be a percentage that's going to be required that we go above and beyond the current budget.
Right.
And I think that is what we do want the public to know, that if there's an increase in salaries, there can be increases in insurance premiums. We haven't done a single thing, and they can go up by $1 million. And so that is the key question that you're asking, and that fluctuates from year to year. I think we've even looked at our local budget to recognize that it would probably take north of $35 million to do in that local budget what we're doing now next year. And so that is part of the struggle that every district has to go through. If we don't get increases in revenue to match what we're doing, then we have to do some things different.
Right, and I don't even think inflation is the right number, because the number that keeps getting quoted by the federal government as what inflation is doesn't seem to match what, we're seeing actual costs.
And to your point, the most commonly used government inflation number is the Consumer Price Index,
Right.
CPI, and that is kind of a basket of goods, if you will, that a typical consumer would purchase over a period of years. Gasoline, food at the grocery store. And it weights those, and then it looks at cost increases. But if you think about a public education entity, it's not the same basket that are our cost drivers.
Right.
We're not going to the grocery store and buying lots of food. We're not using a lot of gasoline, although I guess you could say we're using diesel fuel in our yellow buses. But it's not perhaps the best basket to compare, to your point.
Any further questions or any follow-up? Dr. A?
Yeah, so I guess this is a question more for ourselves than to you, but I mean, we're looking at this fund balance that's diminishing, and we have to figure out a way to replenish that fund balance in the setting of increasing, costs of operations, right? So that's something that is going to be a challenge for us.
Yes, and the unassigned fund balance, which is the portion of fund balance that's not already committed or reserved for a purpose, has gone down a little bit. It is not, as Ms. Posey said, at that targeted 6% threshold. Again, in layman's terms, the way that we can get that up is to have our revenues for a year be more than our expenditures for the year. We have no control, for all intents and purposes, over our revenues. We do have some control over our expenditures. We've just pushed out some hiring restrictions, expenditure restrictions, but hiring restrictions on central office positions, central office vacancies now must remain vacant for 90 days. There's a waiver process for mission critical. There's some expenditure restrictions limiting out-of-state travel and limiting expenditures to mission critical things only. And we're going to be really pushing that hard this year, because that ultimately is how a fund balance can be increased. And only other examples that come to mind where revenues have driven it rather than expenditure control was during the Great Recession, when we received an influx of ARA funds, and then during the pandemic when we received significant influx of the pandemic relief funds. But again, one-time funding.
Right.
And so if I can, I mean, there's an important point there. I think some of you will remember this from previous budget discussions. But again, like, if someone's watching this for the first time, all of these funds don't just flow into one bank account where we can pick and choose on how we spend them, where we have restricted funds and unrestricted funds. And just because, say, we don't expend all of the funds in a certain account, doesn't mean that we can then use those in our fund balance, right? The types of funds that are available for like this unrestricted or discretionary use are very limited. And so we don't have as many options on where we can draw those. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, yes, Mr.
And so that might be one thing in a future meeting, we might want to look at sort of, where, if we were to reduce expenditures, as you talk about, where those expenditures could then help us offset declines in fund balance versus something that might have to be returned to the state or something we otherwise could not use for those purposes.
Yes, and maybe to add a little bit to what I believe you're saying, Mr. Haggerty, state funds, for the most part, if they're not used at the end of the year, will revert back to the state. There's some categories of state funds we're allowed to carry over. Federal funds, usually most categories we do have a carryover. Local funds we can carry over. So we do have some flexibility in use of funding sources. Anything that's going to revert, we obviously want to use. It's kind of use it or lose it. Anything that doesn't revert, though, that's where we can be cautious, and through some transfers or through, as I believe we shared with the board previously, we receive position allotments from the state where they will pay for 10 months of teacher, whether it's a veteran teacher with a much higher salary or entry-level teacher with a much lower salary. And so we will put our most expensive teachers on those position allotments, which can create savings then.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions or any comments? Dr. Taylor, do you have a closing statement for us?
Absolutely. I do want to go back to the fund balance statement, and thank you, Dr. Ng, for bringing that out. And one of the things we want to make everyone aware of is that we knew that during the COVID period that fund balances were going to grow. And I think the great thing is that commissioners understood that, and they continued to fund us at appropriate levels, which did give us the opportunity to grow the fund balance. And Tricia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2019 it was around $11 million, I want to say.
You were going there and I was flipping
Yeah,
to
it
the
was
page.
in that range.
11.3.
11.3, so that's what I found. I could have looked on the page and found it there. But that is one of the things that, as we go into this budget cycle, we want to make sure that we now begin to do those things that doesn't ask the board to suspend its policy and go beyond what is that normal appropriation. Now, obviously, the board can choose to do something different. That's been a recommendation that we've made in the past, but what we're looking at now is trying to not do that for the reasons that you talked about, being responsible with the fund balance. But it is larger than it was in the past, but obviously it was a much smaller budget, and so we have to make sure to understand that those numbers have to be looked at appropriately. But that is something that we are aware of, and we want to make sure that we're good stewards when it comes to the fund balance. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just say two things that I want to highlight is the clean audit. And we want our public to know and recognize that this process looks at where our dollars are, and they are, as Tyler has said, what they profess to be. And there's obviously work beyond that that would look at fraud and things of that nature, but that's not what this process is about. But we've had a clean audit in 36 years of that awards of excellence. We want to highlight that. And I also want to thank our audit committee, because it is about that external view that we have. And I've had an opportunity to visit districts all across the state. And what we do here, I know, is unique, and you guys are a part of that, and we thank you for that. And with that, Mr. Chair, we want everyone to know that our finance team has done an outstanding job. We continue to lean on them, and we thank you for that. And with that, I'll turn it back.
All right, thank you, Dr. Taylor. And so with that, at 3:10 PM. I'll call our committee meeting closed. Thank you all.